Okay, so I know that if you watch Mr. Walker's video, which you always should, that looked a little confusing. I don't think your homework is quite as hard as some of the things he was showing. What we need to understand as we begin today is two things. First off, remember that 100 centimeters equals 1 meter. So for every meter, there's 100 centimeters. Okay, it takes 100 centimeters to equal 1 meter. And what we're going to be looking at today is if we divided a meter into tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're looking at the comparison today between a tenth and a 100th. A tenth and a 100th. And here's how I want you to think. In this meter, that's divided into tenths, there's also 100 centimeters in here. And every box, which is a tenth, if we take 100 and we divide it by 10, well, what times 10 is 100? 10 times 10 is 100. So every little box is going to equal 10 centimeters. So 10 centimeters, and this another box that would altogether that would be 20, 30, 40, 50. 5 boxes would be 5 times 10, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Every box would have 10 centimeters in it. Okay? So think about that as we think about this first question. What is the length of the shaded part of the meter stick in centimeters? Okay, well, it's 1/10 or 10 centimeters. The length of the shaded part in centimeters, well, it's 10 centimeters because each box equals 10 centimeters. If there was 2 boxes shaded, how many centimeters would there be? There'd be 20 centimeters. If there were 3 boxes shaded, there would be 30 centimeters. If there were 9 boxes shaded, there would be 90 centimeters. So you've got to think about the comparison that there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So all the way across, there'd be 100. But if we divide that 100 into groups of 10, there'd be 10 boxes, and each box would equal 10 centimeters. Okay, so just think about that. That's a little bit confusing, the first part is. I think it gets a little bit easier the further we go. Now, part B says what fraction of a meter is 1 centimeter. So now look, this is 10 centimeters. We said that's 1/10 of a fraction, but this time we don't have 10 centimeters. We have 1 centimeter. How many centimeters are in 1 meter? There's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So if we only have 1 centimeter, we have 1 out of 100, or 1/100th is how we write that. 1 out of 100. What fraction of a meter is 1 centimeter? It's 1 out of 100 or 100th. In fraction form, express the length of the shaded portion of a meter stick. So remember, every little box, if we divide a meter into 10 pieces, every little box equals how many centimeters? 10. Remember, we did 10, 20, 30, like that a minute ago. So every box, we divide this meter into 10 boxes. So there'd be 10 centimeters in each box. So in fraction form, express the length of the shaded portion of the meter stick. So that's 10 out of 100. If we only had 1 centimeter, one of those little lines filled in, that'd be 1 out of 100. But on this, we have 10 out of 100 shaded in. In decimal form, express the length of the shaded portion of the meter stick. Well, 10 hundredths. Now, he introduced you to a new place value today. So let's just write a number over here, 24.75. So this is our tens place. We know this is our ones place. We've done 3 lessons already this week. This is our tenths place. And the number to the right of the tenths place is the hundredths, not hundreds, but hundredths place. So In decimal form, express the length of the shaded portion of the meter stick. Well, the shaded portion is 10 hundredths. So we use 0.10. 10 hundredths. What fraction of a meter then is 10 centimeters? We'll look up here. What fraction is shaded in? There's 10 centimeters. It's 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 1/10. 10 centimeters is 1/10 of a meter. Take a deep breath. You have to do some thinking on this, okay? But you can get it. These numbers, these changing back and forth between fractions and decimals and tenths and hundredths is the hard part. You just really have to think through it. Okay? Now, the next part is a bit easier. 1/10 is how many hundredths? Well, let's look back at our picture here. Here's 1/10, right? 1/10. And how many hundredths each box represents? How many? 10. 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths. So 10 hundredths, put it in the box here. 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths. 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths. And he showed us, Mr. Walker showed us that there's 1/10. It's the same as 10 hundredths, isn't it? You still have 0.1. You just put a 0 after it. Doesn't make it any bigger or any smaller. It's like an equivalent fraction. As a matter of fact, it's this next one. Remember when we did equivalent fractions? What do? You say, how did I make a 10 a 100? I multiplied it times 10. 10 times 10 is 100. We do the same thing to the top side. 1 times 10 is 10. So 1/10 is the same thing as 10 hundredths. 2/10 is the same thing as 20 what? Well, how did I make a 2 a 20? Multiplied it times 10. When I do 10 times 10, I get 100. 2/10 is the same as 20 hundredths. Okay. Write the equivalent decimal on this next part. So the last few, we're just changing these fractions into decimals, which is super duper easy. We've already done that this week, except we're adding some hundredths to it. 8/10, 0.8. 8/10. 7 hundredths. Now we're not going to put the 7 in the tenths place. We're going to move it over 1 and put it in the hundredths place. So 7 hundredths is 0. We don't have any tenths. We only have 7 hundredths. That's the tricky part. Do not write 7 hundredths like that. That's 7 tenths. You got to put a 7 in the hundredths place. All right, let's look at some more. 19 hundredths. 19 hundredths. Put a 19 after the 0. There's 19 in the hundredths place. 28 hundredths. We're just going to put a 28 after the 0. 77 hundredths. We're just going to put a 77 after the 0, and it goes all the way over to the hundredths place. 94 hundredths. We're going to put a 94 after the 0. It goes to the hundredths place. So when we read these decimals now, we read these not as 0.19. We read it as 19, and because it goes to the hundredths place, we read it as 19 hundredths, 28 hundredths, 77 hundredths, 94 hundredths. We say it the same as if it was a fraction. We say it exactly the same way. So really, the big part of the lesson today is just understanding that after you do the tenths place in decimals, there's this place to the right of it called the hundredths place. Okay? And we looked at the comparison between tenths and 100ths by looking at that meter stick and understanding that 1 hundredth is the same as 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths. They're equivalent fractions. 1/10 equals 10 hundredths. They're equivalent fractions. Okay? All right. So your assignment is just like that. This last part I think is easier because you're just writing in the decimals. Make sure when you're typing them in, you put the 0 in front of the decimal or it'll count it wrong, okay? All right, I'll let you get started. You may need some help with some of these in the meet today. That's fine if you do. I'll be glad to help you. See you then.